Welcome back to Dead Reckoning, the Human Life Expectancy channel. This is the third of 4 videos on traditional technologies that could impact human life expectancy going forward, and will focus on food technologies. We need food to thrive, and what food we consume has an enormous impact on the length and quality of our lives and the environmental impact we have on Earth's ecosystems. From the discovery of fire, to the use of plows and the shift to an agrarian society, to the discoveries of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and GMO foods, food technologies have been at the core of driving the increase in human population and HLE. As a species, we have had unprecedented success in creating and providing food sources for ourselves. In our Is Evolution Evolving video, we showed that for over 23,000 years, we've domesticated crops and animals to make our food ever more plentiful and nutritious. We have dramatically changed the earth to feed ourselves. In addition to the fact that we and our livestock now comprise over 90% of the biomass of animals weighing more than 1 kilogram, about half of all habitable land on Earth is used for agriculture. As a result, deaths from starvation per capita have fallen from 82 per 100,000 people per year after the Persian Great Famine of 1870 to 71, to just 0.5 per 100,000 per year today. Yet, we face numerous food-related problems. First, despite all of our advances, around 9 million people still die of hunger and hunger-related diseases every year. This is more than die from AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. Starvation disproportionately affects the poor and the young, with around 45% of deaths among children aged 5 and younger. The less severe condition of undernourishment currently affects about 842 million people, or about 1 in 8 people in the world population. People become undernourished from droughts, climate change, and lack of access to food from poverty, poor infrastructure, and war. The majority of those who are hungry live in countries experiencing ongoing conflict and violence, and more than 75% of the world's malnourished children live in countries affected by conflict. Undernutrition harms the immune system and virtually every other vital organ system. The developmental, economic, social, and medical impacts of the global burden of undernutrition are serious and lasting for individuals, families, and society. Eliminating hunger is in our power. In addition to the food technologies we'll cover in this video, the energy and water technologies in our last videos, and societal changes we'll discuss in future videos should allow us to greatly reduce this scourge of humanity and lengthen human life expectancy. Paradoxically, an even larger problem is obesity. Today, obesity rates are eclipsing hunger rates globally. In 2020, while 462 million adults were underweight, over 1.9 billion adults were classified as overweight or obese, over 4 times as many. And for the first time in human history, more people are dying of conditions related to our excess consumption of meat and processed foods, such as heart disease, stroke, cancer, and diabetes, than all other causes of death combined. The worldwide prevalence of obesity nearly tripled between 1975 and 2016. In 2016, 39% of adults aged 18 years and older were overweight. Overall, about 13% of the world's adult population, 11% of men and 15% of women, were obese in 2016. Obesity is generally caused by eating too much and moving too little. We'll cover the moving too little and exercise in future videos. For now, on the eating too much side, consumption of sugars and refined grains, as well as excess consumptions of fats and calories from meats and milk products, top the list of drivers of obesity. The global food industry sells 285 million tons of meat and 150 billion gallons of milk per year. Between 1960 and 2020, per capita meat consumption grew from 23 kilograms to almost 40 kilograms, and milk consumption per capita grew from 73 kilograms to 83 kilograms. The Lancet 2020 Countdown report found that global deaths from excess red meat consumption grew 72% since 1990. Our food production is also a major contributor to climate change. A recent study found that more than a third of man-made greenhouse gas emissions are generated by our food systems. Livestock alone are responsible for 14.5% of global greenhouse gases. Clearing land to produce more meat is driving deforestation and extinction in the Amazon and around the world. As a result, meat has between 3 and 20 times higher carbon footprint than vegetarian alternatives. In addition, in the U.S., 40% of agricultural energy is used to manufacture synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. Also, nitrogen-rich runoff from synthetic fertilizers has created enormous dead zones in seawaters near river deltas as nitrates deprive marine life of oxygen. More broadly, self-interested agents and the tragic economic logic of commons has led to damaged natural resources of air, land, and water, and depleted stocks of fish, lumber, minerals, and other natural resources. In addition, our ability to feed ourselves is now threatened by climate change as higher temperatures reduce the growth duration for many of our most important crops, including maize, wheat, soybeans, and rice. Another major problem with our global food supply is waste. About 1/3 of the world's food, nearly 1.3 billion tons each year, is lost or wasted, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. For all industrialized nations, food waste accounts for roughly $680 billion annually. In low-income countries, most of the loss occurs during production, while in developed countries, much food, about 100 kilograms per person per year, is wasted at the consumption stage. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimated in 2014 that food waste causes a global economic, environmental, and social cost of $2.6 trillion a year and is responsible for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's the fact that we're killing billions of sentient creatures a year to feed ourselves, and in many cases subjecting them to unspeakable cruelty during their lives. Globally, we slaughter about 77 billion livestock a year, about 10 for every person per year, including 61 billion chickens, 3 billion ducks, 1.4 billion pigs, 600 million turkeys, 540 million sheep, and 300 million cattle. Note that since we get approximately 100 times the meat from each cow than we get from each chicken, the weight of total beef consumed is about half the weight of total chicken consumed. In addition, there are about 250 million cows producing milk around the world. While the natural lifespan of many cows can reach 15 or even 20 years of age, the vast majority of dairy cows are not permitted to live more than 4 to 6 years, at which point they're sent to slaughter, usually after their production levels drop. In the U.S., this accounts for about 20% of beef production. In short, humanity's food supply chain is increasingly divorced from our needs. This points to the need to fundamentally transform the human food chain. We simply must do better to serve ourselves, other animals, and the planet. Out of necessity, there's much that we can and will do, including consuming more sustainable types of meat, consuming more vegetarian sources of protein, using new food technologies such as GMOs, cultured meat, vertical farming, and digital food technologies. So let's start with sustainable meats. Animals vary widely in their abilities to turn grains and other feed into protein. Agricultural economists calculate feed conversion ratios as the ratio of weight of feed that's required to increase an animal's edible meat. The lower this ratio, the more efficient the animal is at turning feed into meat. Typical feed conversion ratios for animals raised using commercial feeds and intensive production methods are as follows. Beef are usually 6 to 10, pigs are 2.7 to 5, chickens are 1.7 to 2.0, and farmed fish and shrimp are between 1 and 2.4. There are meaningful other differences, including their health qualities, the calories, fat content, etc., economics and environmental impacts, but at a top level, simply swapping beef with chicken or fish could allow us to produce 3 to 5 times the amount of meat for roughly the same level of agricultural inputs. This alone could have an enormous impact on our ability to feed humanity. Chicken are astonishingly efficient producers of protein, and because they're lower on the food chain than cattle, pigs, or sheep, many of us feel less bad about eating them. As a result, at any given moment, there are over 20 billion chickens globally that we've bred to be either layers, which are breeds raised to produce prodigious amounts of eggs, and broilers, which are breeds that are plump and meaty. However, chicken also has problems as a food source. Chickens are often injected with hormones, antibiotics, and other drugs to make them grow faster, lay more eggs, and resist diseases resulting from their unnatural confinement. PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, calls chickens, quote, the most abused animal on the planet, unquote. Despite the fact that chickens are relatively intelligent social creatures, broilers spend their entire lives in filthy sheds with tens of thousands of other birds, where intense crowding and confinement lead to outbreaks of disease. They're bred and drugged to grow so large so quickly that their legs and organs can't keep up, making heart attacks, organ failure, and crippling leg deformities common. Many become crippled under their own weight and eventually die because they can't reach the water nozzles. When they're only 6 or 7 weeks old, they're crammed into cages and trucked to slaughter. Layers are crammed together inside wire cages where they don't even have enough room to spread their wings. Because the hens are crammed so closely together, these normally clean animals are forced to urinate and defecate on one another. The birds also have part of their sensitive beaks cut off so that they won't peck at each other out of frustration created by this unnatural confinement. Chicken production can also have large impacts on the environment through carbon emissions. Although chickens' digestive systems don't emit methane, their manure does release nitrous oxide, which has almost 300 times the global warming potential of CO2. Chicken farming also requires large amounts of water for growing and processing. Another increasingly popular, more healthy, low feed conversion ratio substitute for beef is fish. Seafood now makes up over half the weight of meat from livestock. However, the amount of fish caught in wild fisheries has leveled off at about 90 million tons per year, and there's debate about whether that amount can be sustained going forward. In addition, wild-caught fish involves extensive killing of bycatch marine creatures. The ratio of target to bycatch, which includes whales, dolphins, turtles, and many endangered species, can be as low as 1 to 14. Wild-caught fish is also highly energy intensive. For example, it's been estimated that every kilogram of wild-caught salmon requires 2.5 to 5 liters of diesel fuel to produce. As a result, aquaculture, which involves raising fish commercially in tanks or enclosures such as fish ponds, now is responsible for almost half of all seafood production and all the growth in the seafood production since 2000. However, farming carnivorous fish such as salmon and trout requires even more diesel fuel because their food pellets are made from wild forage fish, which takes additional fuel to catch and process. It also creates pollution, habitat destruction, and interbreeding, causing wild fisheries to plummet. Humans' increasing consumption of beef, pork, chicken, and other meats, combined with the fact that it takes 2 to 20 times the number of calories, up to 600 gallons of water, petrochemical, drugs, and other inputs to produce a pound of meat, will make it difficult, if not impossible, for current consumption trends to continue. So, the second thing we can do to transform our food supply is to consume more vegetarian sources of protein. Many high-protein foods can serve as meat substitutes. Almonds, cashews, peanuts, and other nuts and nut butters have similar protein densities to beef or chicken. However, they have more than twice the calorie density, which may not be good for those that are obese, and sometimes require large amounts of water to produce. Beans, such as refried beans, chickpeas, and soybeans, or edamame, have the advantage of being very inexpensive compared to meat. However, they only have about a third the protein density and less than half the calorie density of beef or chicken. Also, some find them less tasty and more difficult to digest. About 2,000 years ago in China, people discovered that milk from soybeans could be coagulated and pressed into blocks of tofu. Also known as bean curd, tofu is pressed into solid white blocks of varying firmness. Extra firm tofu has the firmness of fully cooked meat. Tofu also has a subtle flavor, so that it can be used in both savory and sweet dishes, and is often seasoned or marinated to suit the dish and its flavors, and due to its spongy texture, it absorbs flavors well. Like beans, tofu has about 1/3 the protein density of beef or chicken. It also has a calorie density of about 1/3 that of meat. It's high in iron and can have a high calcium or magnesium content depending upon the coagulants that are used in manufacturing. The feed conversion ratio for tofu is as low as 0.29, which is about 70 times more efficient than beef. After being developed in China, where it remains a mainstay of common diet, tofu spread to Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, and Korea, along with East Asian Buddhism as an important source of vegetable protein. The global tofu market size was about 2.5 billion in 2020. While the billions of people who eat it today might disagree with characterizing tofu as a meat substitute, as a practical matter, tofu could serve this role for many who currently consume meat and are converting to more healthy, environmentally sustainable, and ethical sources of food. If U.S. consumers ate more tofu, the U.S. could be in a good position to become the world's largest producer because it's both the largest economy and the largest grower of soybeans, accounting for 34% of the world's soybean production. However, adoption has remained low. The largest producer of tofu in the U.S. is House Foods America, founded in 1983, that currently reports having only $2.35 million in capital. Sometime between the 10th and the 19th centuries, Indonesian cultures began fermenting soybeans with a fungus to form cakes of tempeh as a staple source of protein. Like tofu, tempeh is made from soybeans, but it's a whole soybean product with different nutritional characteristics and textural qualities. Tempeh's fermentation process and its retention of the whole bean give it a higher content of protein, dietary fiber, and vitamins. It has more than twice the protein density of tofu, about 2/3 as much as chicken or beef, and calorie density similar to beef or chicken. It has a firm texture and an earthy flavor which becomes more pronounced as it ages. The global market for tempeh is estimated at $3.7 billion. In the 6th century, Seitan was created as a vegetarian alternative to meat. It's made from gluten, the main protein of wheat. Some types of wheat gluten have a chewy or stringy texture that resembles meat more closely than other substitutes, such as tofu. Seitan is often used instead of meat in Asian, vegetarian, Buddhist, and macrobiotic cuisines. The global seitan market is only about 300 million. About 5,000 years ago, the Mesopotamians discovered that they could ferment milk with bacteria, which acts on milk protein to give yogurt its texture and characteristic tart flavor. Today, yogurt has become very popular among vegetarians and non-vegetarians alike. It also comes in countless varieties, including low-fat and no-fat varieties, different flavors made from different types of animals and plant milks. With a global market size of over $40 billion, it eclipses other non-meat sources of protein. However, it has less than 1/8 the protein density of beef or chicken, with less than half the caloric density. Recently in the U.S., other plant-based meat substitutes have made significant inroads. The company Beyond Meat has developed the Beyond Burger, which is a plant-based burger that they say looks, cooks, and satisfies like beef. In November 2020, Beyond Meat announced a collaboration with McDonald's and the development of the McPlant option, a plant-based patty and chicken substitute formulation. Also in November 2020, Beyond Meat announced the launch in China of a plant-based version of minced pork. Another producer of plant-based meat is Impossible Foods. They say, quote, "Using animals to make meat is a prehistoric and destructive technology. We're making meat from plants so that we never have to use animals again. That way we can eat all the meat we want, for as long as we want, and save the best planet in the known universe." Unquote. The company says that making their plant-based meat substitute uses 95% less land and 74% less water, and it emits about 87% less greenhouse gas than making ground beef. In July 2020, Impossible Burger patties became available at Trader Joe's and about 2,100 Walmart locations across the United States. The total valuations of Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods as of November 2020 are $8.9 billion and $2 billion respectively. For comparison, the two largest public meat producers, Tyson Foods and JBS USA, have values of $27.7 billion and $11.3 billion. So, while investors are willing to bet that meat substitutes will play a large part in human food chain going forward, there's plenty of progress to be made. Other plant-based meat substitutes include algae, which reduces land usage by 75-fold and reduces freshwater usage by a factor of 7,400, and fungi that can be fed carbohydrates and fermented in tanks to provide mycoproteins. The third thing we'll do to transform the human food supply is to use new food technologies. New food technologies can make food even more plentiful and nutritious, allowing us to feed ourselves better and increase HLE, while reducing damage to the environment and the needless sufferings and death of billions of animals a year. Technology has always revolutionized our food supply. In addition to the switch to an agrarian society and other agricultural revolutions that were driven by technologies, between 1950 and the late 1960s, the Green Revolution used high-yielding new varieties of grain cereals, distribution of hybridized seeds, synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and the expansion of irrigation infrastructure. It contributed to widespread reduction of poverty, averted hunger for millions, raised incomes, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, reduced land use for agriculture, and contributed to the declines of infant mortality. Then, in the 1990s, we developed the ability to make targeted changes to DNA using genetic engineering, resulting in genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. We'll cover genetic engineering in detail in future videos. But for now, we'll simply acknowledge that this was a big step forward, because instead of creating random mutations through mutagenic breeding that caused both good and bad changes throughout a seed's genome, targeted changes could be achieved to specific areas of DNA. Today, genetic engineering provides us much greater control over the volitional evolution of plants and animals. Since they were first introduced in 1996, the use of GMO crops has grown dramatically. The first GMO crops to be released commercially on a large scale provided protection from insect pests or tolerance to herbicides. This made the insect and weed management of crops easier and increased crop yield. However, designing plants that were able to tolerate specific herbicides got GMO technology off on the wrong foot, as activists claimed, with some legitimate basis that GMOs were being used by big pharma companies to promote the use of their pesticides and fertilizers. GMO crops that directly improve yield by accelerating growth or making the plant more hardy, for example by improving salt, cold, or drought tolerance and superior fungal or viral resistance, soon followed, as well as crops with increased nutritional and industrial value. Given the success and many benefits of GMOs, it's odd that GMOs have attracted far more public skepticism and regulation than radiation and chemically induced mutagenic plants that have dominated agriculture since the 1930s. After all, why should targeted human-directed changes to plant DNA be subject to greater scrutiny than multiple random and unspecified genetic changes induced by chemicals or radiation, which are not prohibited by any nation's organic standards? Today, there's a scientific consensus that currently available foods derived from GMOs pose no greater risk to human health than conventional foods. Reports from the U.S. National Academy of Sciences state that there is no scientific justification for regulating genetically engineered crops while not doing so for mutation breeding crops. Yet, in many countries, public perception of this fact lags reality considerably. Overcoming this challenge is critical because the increased volume of food and enhanced nutrients in GMOs will be needed to support the expected growth in human population. In addition to crops, scientists have also used genetic engineering to create transgenic livestock of many types. Cattle, pigs, chicken, fish, and other primary sources of animal protein have all been dramatically altered by the genetic engineering to support human consumption. However, acceptance of transgenic livestock into the food chain has been slow. To date, salmon is the only transgenic animal approved for use as a food in the U.S. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration regulates them as animal drugs, that is, medicine for animals rather than food, so they have to go through an expensive testing process that makes it difficult for them to be viable commercially. Accordingly, the massive potential benefits of transgenic livestock have been excluded from our calculations of future HLE. We've also recently developed the technological capability of creating laboratory-grown or cultured meat that's now poised to disrupt both the meat industry and the plant-based meat industry. Cultured meat can taste better, be far better for us, and involve no cruelty nor killing of animals. It offers the prospect of saving billions of dollars currently spent on animal feed, shelter, healthcare, and waste processing, and greatly reducing the environmental impacts of meat. The concept of cultured meat was popularized by Jason Matheny in the early 2000s after co-authoring a seminal paper on cultured meat production. He created New Harvest, the world's first nonprofit organization that's dedicated to strategically funding and conducting open, public, collaborative research that reinvents the way we make animal products without animals. Since then, a number of companies have sprung up to bring cultured meat to markets around the world. In 2013, Dr. Mark Post founded Mosa Meat and famously cooked and ate a cultured meat hamburger in 2013 that had cost a whopping 250,000 euros to produce. Now, Mosa Meat can produce a cultured meat burger for only about 9 euros. Memphis Meats is a California cultured meat startup founded by cardiologist Dr. Uma Valenti and cell biologist Dr. Nicholas Genovese in 2015. Memphis Meats produced cultured meat nuggets, beef meatballs, and duck meat. In 2020, the company completed a $161 million Series B fundraising, by far the largest funding round ever completed by a cultured meat company, which the company intends to use to construct a pilot production facility. With over $181 million in private funding from backers including Richard Branson, Bill Gates, and meat industry giant Tyson Foods, many are expecting Memphis Meats to be the first company to successfully release a cultured meat product. Aleph Farms is an Israeli startup developing cultured meat products. Whereas most cultured meat companies are developing unstructured meat products such as burgers and nuggets, which are technically easier to produce, Aleph Farms is going one step further by creating cultured steaks using proprietary 3D technology. The process involves using a specifically designed scaffold to culture muscle, fat, and connective tissue alongside vasculature to produce a fully formed steak within 3 to 4 weeks. Aleph Farm claims its technologies allow several types of cells to grow together into complex shape, something which has historically been a major hurdle to developing structured meat products. After seeding in a bioreactor, the cells grow directly into the structure of a steak on the scaffold, rather than needing to be manually combined afterwards. The company is aiming to reach the market with a limited launch within 3 to 4 years. Steaks will be grown in biofarms, large facilities with tanks similar to those seen in dairy factories or breweries. Last year, at least $366 million was invested in the cultured meat sector. Meat processor JBS spent $41 million to acquire Spanish cultured meat company Biotech Foods. It's the first time the food giant has stepped into the market. However, cultured meat also faces significant obstacles. It must overcome regulatory hurdles, find sustainable growth mediums, gain consumer acceptance, and survive legal battles from heavily funded lobbyists for existing meats. The cultured meat industry enjoyed a global first in December 2020 when a San Francisco-based startup named Just Eat won regulatory approval to sell its cultured chicken in Singapore, making the Southeast Asian state the first nation in the world to approve cultured meat. More startups around the world are preparing to test production of lab-grown meats like beef and chicken in factories. While there's a long way to go, it's a crucial step in getting cell-based products ready for supermarket shelves. Another technology that's poised to transform the human food supply chain is vertical farming. This involves growing crops indoors in vertically stacked layers, and often incorporates controlled environment agriculture, which aims to optimize plant growth and soilless farming techniques such as hydroponics, aquaponics, and aeroponics. It allows the integration of sensors, AI, and robotics, including cameras and other sensors, which can monitor for color and other factors such as disease, artificial intelligence, which can process the data from sensors and formulate solutions, and automated and even autonomous mechatronics, robots and other automated machines which pick the produce when it's ready for market or apply cures to ailments during their growing. This has multiple advantages. It's resulted in over 10 times the crop yield of traditional farming methods. Crops can be grown year-round and do not suffer from weather disruptions because they're indoors. The variety of crops can also be changed instantly to meet local demands. The controlled indoor environment allows for much more efficient use of water and no need for pesticides. It's even been used on the International Space Station to grow greens for astronauts. Shipping costs are reduced when farms are located near large population zones. Vertical farming is also less disruptive to native plants and animals than large monoculture farms that exist today. It also got a boost with LED lights that are less expensive, generate less heat, reducing the amount of cooling required, and can be tuned to different frequencies to optimize the growth of specific plants. However, there are multiple challenges associated with vertical farming. First, the buildings for vertical farming can cost more than croplands and utilize more energy to control the growing environment. We also have much to learn about the relationship between plant microbes, the microbiome in our gut, and human health. Will growing plants using man-made fertilizers outside the biosphere of natural microbial-rich soil produce healthy crops? Many companies are already using this technology. AeroFarms uses its own patented aeroponic technology, which grows plants in a mist environment without any use of soil, to take outdoor vertical farming to a new level of precision and productivity with minimal environmental impact and virtually zero risk. The company's raised $138 million in funding since its launch in 2004, according to Crunchbase. Plenty, Bowery Farming, and Bright Farming are other big money vertical farming startups to watch. Finally, advanced digital technologies are also cutting food waste, reducing carbon emissions from landfills, and producing valuable chemicals, energy, soil and fertilizers, and feed to animals. Advanced algorithms help to choose the right crops and rotate them over time. Sensors and robotics ensure plants are watered and fertilized optimally, and market algorithms help to ensure that they're linked to markets efficiently for sale. Consumer education programs over the internet also reduce spoilage by helping customers to plan their food shopping and avoiding the purchase of too much perishable food, avoid potentially wasteful spontaneous purchases, and store foods properly. Better communication algorithms also allow waste food to be fed to other animals. Also, new biorefining processes allow companies to process biomass into a spectrum of products and energy. Driven by the need to improve our health, fight climate change, and eliminate the suffering and death of billions of sentient animals, we will increasingly transform our food supply. Uniquely among species, we have the ability to rise above our individual needs and desires for foods and ask what foods are best for our overall welfare. However, this will require more than just the acts of individual consumers. It'll require support from governmental organizations and countries to suggest and enact policies, regulations, and taxes that actively support it. Without such support, the entrenched power of current agricultural providers worldwide will greatly slow the progress of these necessary changes. More on this in future videos. So, how might transforming our food supply impact HLE going forward? Deaths from undernutrition can and should reduce significantly in the next 20 years as new food, water, and energy technologies advance, as increased globalization and other societal changes are realized. In addition, we expect that we'll reduce the percentage of deaths linked to poor diet, currently about 20% of yearly deaths, or 11 million deaths a year, by consuming more healthy foods, including whole grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables, and less sugar, salt, and processed meats. The impacts of this food supply transformation are so large that different assumptions about the type and rate of innovations drive different levels of forecast HLE. Based on our research and advice from experts, we formed different assumptions and incorporated them into the scenarios that were used to determine our forecasts of HLE. In our next video, we'll explore potential impacts of new transportation technologies on HLE. In the meantime, please hit the like button below, subscribe to the Human Life Expectancy channel to make sure you don't miss our next videos, and post comments for the topics you'd like to have us cover. Thanks for joining us. Till next time, as we say at Human Life Expectancy Inc., Hi hua! Please, do what you can to help yourself and help us all to live longer.